Imagine waking up before the sun, not to an alarm clock buzzing, but to the sound of a coal wagon rattling over cobblestones outside your window, the clip-clop of a horse's hooves, and somewhere down the hall, the scratch of a match being struck, because that is how you were about to see anything at all. This was New York City in 1910, a place balanced on the edge of 2 centuries, where gas lamps still flickered in some rooms while electric bulbs glowed newly in others, where indoor plumbing was a luxury for some families and a distant rumor for others, and where the simple act of living inside 4 walls could look wildly different depending on which block you called home. Today we are stepping through the front door, and sometimes the fire escape, of a New York house in 1910, to see what daily life actually felt like, smelled like, and sounded like, for the people who called this restless, growing city their home. Let's start with the truth that New York in 1910 was not one city, it was several cities stacked on top of each other, separated not by miles but by staircases and street corners. If you were wealthy, home might mean a brownstone on the Upper West Side, with a parlor floor for entertaining, a dumbwaiter creaking between floors, and a live-in servant or 2 tucked into the back rooms. If you were working class, home might mean a railroad flat in a tenement on the Lower East Side, 4 or 5 rooms stretched out in a straight line like train cars, with only the front and back rooms getting any real daylight. And if you were among the poorest, home might mean a single room shared by an entire family, sometimes with boarders sleeping in shifts just to help cover the rent. The word house, in 1910 New York, could mean a mansion, or it could mean a tiny slice of a crowded building where privacy was a concept you had heard about but rarely experienced. Picture stepping inside one of those Lower East Side tenements, because this is where most New Yorkers actually lived. You would climb a dim staircase, the air thick with the smell of cooking oil, coal smoke, and whatever the building's plumbing happened to be doing that day. Many of these buildings had been built before laws required proper ventilation, which is exactly why New York passed the Tenement House Act back in 1901, forcing new buildings to include air shafts and at least one window in every room. By 1910, the newer tenements, sometimes nicknamed New Law buildings, were a noticeable improvement, but plenty of families still lived in older Old Law tenements where the middle rooms saw no natural light at all, day or night. You would light a lamp just to find your shoes in the morning. Inside one of these apartments, space was the most precious commodity of all. A typical railroad flat might hold a kitchen, a parlor that doubled as a bedroom at night, and 1 or 2 additional bedrooms, all connected in a straight line without a hallway. That meant walking through someone else's bedroom just to reach your own, a small daily negotiation of privacy that families simply learned to navigate. The kitchen was the heart of the home, dominated by a coal or wood-burning stove that did triple duty, cooking meals, heating water, and warming the entire apartment during winter. Families gathered close to that stove on cold nights, and older children were often responsible for hauling coal up flights of stairs, a chore that left hands black and lungs full of soot. Now let's talk about something we take completely for granted today: water. In many tenements in 1910, there was no running water inside individual apartments at all. Instead, families shared a water tap in the hallway or out in the courtyard, meaning every glass of water, every pot for cooking, every basin for washing, had to be carried by hand. Bathing was not the quick, private affair it is today. Many families used a large metal tub in the kitchen, filled with water heated on the stove, and the whole family might share that same bathwater, one after another, simply because heating water was too much labor and too much coal to do it individually. As for toilets, plenty of tenement buildings still relied on outhouses in the backyard, shared by multiple families, though by 1910 more buildings were adding shared indoor toilets in the hallway, a genuine improvement that residents did not take lightly. Laundry, meanwhile, was an entire day's undertaking rather than a quick chore. There were no washing machines in most homes. Water had to be hauled and heated, clothes scrubbed by hand on a washboard, wrung out by hand or through a hand-cranked wringer, and then hung to dry, often on lines strung between buildings, crisscrossing the air shafts and back alleys of the neighborhood. If you have ever seen old photographs of New York tenements with laundry lines zigzagging between windows, that was not decoration, that was survival, that was Monday, because Monday was traditionally wash day in most households, a practice inherited from generations before. Let's shift now to the other end of the spectrum, because just a few miles uptown, life inside a New York house looked almost unrecognizable. In a brownstone or townhouse on the Upper West Side or in a fashionable pocket of Brooklyn Heights, a family of means lived across several floors, each one serving a distinct purpose. The parlor floor, often reached by a grand front stoop, was for receiving guests and displaying the family's taste, with heavy furniture, patterned wallpaper, and perhaps one of the newer electric light fixtures replacing the older gas jets. Bedrooms occupied the upper floors, while the basement level held the kitchen and servants' work areas, connected to the rest of the house by a narrow back staircase designed specifically so that servants could move unseen, delivering meals and hauling laundry without ever crossing paths with the family in the main rooms. These homes were far more likely to have indoor plumbing, sometimes even a bathroom with a proper flush toilet and a clawfoot tub, genuine marvels at the time. Central heating was beginning to appear too, with coal-fed furnaces in the basement sending warmth up through pipes and radiators, a massive step up from huddling around a kitchen stove. And electricity, while still a novelty in much of the city, was steadily making its way into wealthier homes, one room at a time, often existing alongside gas fixtures during a transitional period where a single house might have both systems installed, just in case. Whether wealthy or working class, though, certain rhythms of daily life connected almost every household in New York in 1910. Ice, not refrigeration, kept food cold, delivered by the iceman who hauled massive blocks up flights of stairs to fill the wooden icebox in the kitchen. A card placed in the window told him how much ice a family needed that day, and children often ran outside to grab the small chips of ice that fell from the blocks, a simple summer treat in a city without air conditioning. Milk arrived fresh each morning, delivered in glass bottles left on the doorstep or the fire escape, and in tenement neighborhoods, pushcart vendors filled the streets below selling everything from vegetables to second-hand clothing, their calls becoming part of the everyday soundtrack of the city. Sound itself was an entirely different experience in 1910. There were no cars filling the streets yet, not in any real number, so the dominant noise was the clatter of horse-drawn wagons, the ring of trolley bells, and increasingly, the rumble of the subway below, since the first line had opened just a few years earlier in 1904 and was rapidly expanding across the city. Inside the home, without radios or televisions, evenings were filled with conversation, reading aloud, playing cards, or listening to a music box or, for wealthier families, an early phonograph playing scratchy recordings that felt like absolute magic. Heating your home, no matter your income level, meant a relationship with coal that modern people simply cannot imagine. Coal had to be purchased, hauled, stored, and constantly fed into stoves or furnaces, and the soot it produced coated windowsills, curtains, and lungs alike. Spring cleaning was not just a tradition, it was a necessity, a chance to finally scrub away an entire winter's worth of coal dust from every surface in the home. And because so many buildings relied on open flames for both light and heat, fire was a constant and very real danger, one of the reasons fire escapes became such a defining feature of the New York skyline, bolted onto the front of tenement buildings as a literal lifeline. Family structure inside these homes looked different too. It was common, especially in immigrant households, for extended family to live together under one roof, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins sharing space with the immediate family, pooling income and responsibilities. Taking in boarders was an accepted and often essential way to help cover rent, meaning a stranger might sleep in your front parlor for a small weekly fee, a practice so common it barely raised an eyebrow. Children, meanwhile, often shared beds with siblings, sometimes sleeping 2 or 3 to a bed, head to foot, simply because there was no other option in such tight quarters. And yet, despite the crowding, the coal dust, the shared water taps and outhouses, there was an undeniable vibrancy to home life in New York in 1910. Windows opened directly onto fire escapes that doubled as porches on hot summer nights, entire families sleeping outside under the stars when the apartment grew too stifling to bear. Neighbors knew neighbors, doors were often left unlocked or even open, and the boundary between one family's home and the next was far more porous than it is today. A cup of sugar borrowed from next door, a sick child watched by an aunt down the hall, a holiday meal shared among several families in one kitchen because it was the only kitchen large enough. This was simply how life worked when privacy was scarce but community was abundant. By the time we reached the end of 1910, New York stood at a genuine crossroads. Electricity was steadily replacing gas. Indoor plumbing was slowly becoming an expectation rather than a luxury. The automobile was still a rare and expensive novelty, but its arrival was already being felt in conversations about the future of the city's streets. And yet, for most New Yorkers, home in 1910 still meant coal stoves and hauled water, shared hallways and crowded rooms, laundry lines strung across air shafts and iceboxes cooled by delivered blocks of ice. It was a way of living built on labor, proximity, and resourcefulness, a version of home that asked far more of its residents physically than most of us experience today, but one that also built a closeness between neighbors and family members that modern convenience, in some ways, quietly erased. So the next time you walk past one of those old brownstones or catch a glimpse of a weathered fire escape bolted to a tenement building, take a moment to picture it as it once was, full of coal smoke and laundry lines, ice deliveries and shared water taps, a home that demanded effort at every turn, but one that, in its own crowded and imperfect way, was very much alive.